and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women as ideas, visions, and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is the highest-ranking Indian on Capitol Hill, and that's how he's described. I'm delighted to welcome Kris Kolluri.
Kris,
welcome. The highest-ranking Indian on Capitol Hill. What does that make you?
Well, it was a title that was given to me not by choice, but it was given to me strictly based on my seniority, I guess, and it was, and it isn't a title that's designated to people. So I just happened to be there the longest, and I happened to work for the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives. His name is Richard Gephardt. So that is why I've been given that title, I guess, but it is not something I use.
But what is your sort of formal relationship with the senator, and how senior is the senior most Indian on Capitol Hill?
Well, let me describe what I do for the congressman. He is the Democratic leader of the United States House of Representatives, and in that capacity, he's in charge of all the policies the Democrats support and put forward, and he's the official leader, as it is of all the Democrats in the House. In my capacity, my title is the legislative director of the member support program. The position itself is one where I'm in charge of working with marginal members, or members who have really tough elections coming ahead, to make sure I work with them on their long-term legislative strategies. That's my full-time avocation, and my only job is to make sure I do that and do that well, hopefully.
Why do you think that there aren't sort of more Indians holding legislative office in the United States? You know, as they do in Britain, they seem to have fared a lot better than they have fared in the United States.
In 1990, when I first entered politics, there were 3 Indian Americans on Capitol Hill, 3. Today, there are 34, in all levels, and in some very senior levels. The point I want the Indian people to know is that there's been a paradigm shift within the community. For the last several decades, before the 90s, the Indian American community was focused on establishing its roots and assimilating into every facet of society, and entree into politics and government was a bit late, but it's here nonetheless, and I think in due course you will see full integration into the government, into the political process, and I think it's just a matter of maybe it's even as early as next election cycle, you'll see an Indian American stand for election and perhaps even win a seat. So from that standpoint, I don't think we're that far behind the Indians in Britain.
You work for a Democratic congressman. Which way do the Indian Americans tend to vote? Are they sort of predominantly support and finance Democrat candidates, but we get the impression that they do this with the Republicans?
Well, I think that's a fair characterization. Now, I don't have any substantive information to back this up, but my sense is in the 80s, when the community was sort of becoming prosperous, the policies of the Reagan era with tax reductions was certainly an appealing aspect which the Indian American community supported. And as a Democrat, forgive me if I'm being a little partisan, I think with the Republican Party now becoming increasingly taking a conservative position, which probably is not in line with where the Indian American community is, especially as it deals with social policies. I think you're going to see a realignment of political attitudes, and I certainly think the Democrats have much more to offer than the Republicans anyway to the Indian American community.
You know, the impression we got here in India was, you know, when we had the Kargil conflict, it's perhaps a kind of myth that, you know, when we were students in the United States, we were friends with people from Pakistan and what have you. There was this tremendous sense of community because you were from the region, as it were, and there wasn't a sense of difference, and you felt that this was conflict between governments, and there was a sense of community. This time, the Indian community seems to have been quite sort of almost jingoistic on the issue, instead of you know, seeking to cultivate regional cooperation and sort of a soothing balm, as it were, on this. Do you feel that this assertion of one's Indianness in some ways is relatively new during the 15, 16 years that you have been in the U.S.?
I am not sure. I'll go along with the premise of your question. I have noticed, if anything, an increase in attitude in the Indian American community towards truly trying to seek a solution for this bilateral problem between Pakistan and India. I was at a dinner last night, and somebody actually asked a question similar to what you just asked. With the rise in information technology, people now have a voice that they probably lacked a few years ago. So just because there are 10 or 15 or 20 or even 100 more websites of a certain sect of the Indian American community being vocal about about what India should do with Pakistan or what have you, I don't think you can equate that from 0 to infinity and say that all Indian Americans feel that way. I would argue it's just been the opposite. The majority of the effort of the Indian American community has been towards reconciling or engaging or asking India to engage Pakistan, as India has done to its credit, and try to find a solution to this problem. Peace is the ultimate goal and not strife, and I think the Indian community in America would be the first one to recognize it. So I would ask you not to put too much value on the voices of a few Indian Americans. And the greatest part about living, I told the person last night as well, that I was fortunate enough to be born in a democracy and living in a democracy. And one of the ideals I hold very true to my heart and I cherish is the freedom of speech. So, but I ask you not to equate that to say that all Indian Americans feel that way.
How effective has the Indian voice been, say, compared to sort of the other communities, the Chinese, or are seen as a very effective lobbying group for their agendas with the government? So how effective would you say the Indian voice is?
I think it is becoming increasingly more effective, and there are two factors that have made the community into a relatively dominant political force. One is the increase in population size. In 1980, there were less than 400,000 Indian Americans living in the United States. In 2000, there were 1.2 million. So there's certainly a growing number of Indian Americans in the community, and this translates into almost having at least a handful of Indian Americans in every congressional district ready to voice their support for India or Indo-US relations if needed. The second one is obviously the prosperity of the Indian American community. Look, the median income, household income of an Indian American community is $56,000. And the national median income is $30-some-odd thousand. So clearly, there is a nexus between the resources the community had, added to that the population, and they've been able to at least have a voice at the table, both in Congress and in the administration. And I think that is the kind of shift that you're seeing happening, and I think it's a positive one. As a community, if we are to avoid any challenges to us, we need to engage and assimilate into every facet of society, and that's the only thing that I have sort of been, my message all along has been, we cannot as a community, a prosperous community at that, afford to be isolated. We just cannot be about our temples, our stores, and our restaurants. We have to be about America if we are to survive in America, and if we are to prosper more, and if my children and my grandchildren are to prosper. And I think that is the message I think Indian American community is increasingly recognizing is important and is needed. And I certainly think it's going to happen.
The mechanisms that the Indian community has used in coming together to serve as an effective voice, not just in terms of obviously American policy towards India, significant that it is, but also in terms of the interests of the community. So what are some of the mechanisms that operate?
Sure. I'll give you one example. I'll actually give you two. There are in recent years you have seen a proliferation of a lot of small community groups, large community groups, all with a single-minded purpose of working towards one or two issues, and that is no small task for the Indian American community, to try and work on issues, to even have a charter. Like I'll give you an example. There's a group called the Indian American Friendship Council, headed by this great dentist I know named Dr. Krishna Reddy. His sole mission is to enhance Indo-US relations. And he comes to Washington every year. He puts together what is called a legislative conference, where he invites 50, 60, 70 members of Congress, both the Senate and the House, to come and listen to Indian Americans on their concerns and on their policies. Now, I need to emphasize that this is not just about foreign policy either. This is about domestic policy. My concern always has been that we need to devote at least 50% of the energies and the time of the Indian American community to fight for domestic issues, such as immigration, such as education, healthcare. These are important issues because there are needs that we face there as well that we need to address. And these kinds of forums, there's another group called the Indian American Forum for Political Education. And that is not only focused on foreign policy issues, but also domestic issues. And those are the kinds of groups that I'm sort of very pleased to see happening, and they're coming with increasing numbers to Washington, and also in their communities, to make sure that the members of the Indian American community not only participate, but are aware of the kind of policies that they are trying to engage in.
You know, the United States is seen as a melting pot of cultures, communities, people of different national origins. When or at what point do you think that sort of that sense of one's Indian identity, and you addressed this before, that you know, striking a balance in a sense, but an Italian American, say, or an Irish American retains some sense of his Irishness, but feels dominantly an American. When you come from sort of an Eastern background, from an Indian background and a heritage, and where in some senses the difference between a dominant culture in the United States is that much wider. When does this gap get bridged? I mean, obviously there isn't a decisive moment or a decisive event, but what are the kinds of things that sort of represent a merging of this identity in a sense?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point that you bring about Italian Americans. I have lots of friends who are Italian and who have, but who have had almost for 3 or 4 generations they've been brought up in the United States, but they still maintain a very strong root to Italy and their heritage. And I think when my children and my grandchildren get to the point where they have sort of lost the kind of touch that I have with India, my only hope is that I have given my children enough of the lessons I learned in India for them to carry on. Because I think it is unavoidable in the end that they will become increasingly American. But that does not mean we completely live without all the things that India has taught us. And I think what you're seeing is increasing awareness. Even my uncle, who has 2 young daughters, he takes them to Bharatanatyam classes every day. They were born in the United States. He takes them to Bharatanatyam classes, to Sanskrit classes. So what you're seeing is this increasing awareness that it is okay to be American, but we still need to have our Indianness intact. Because I think there are some wonderful things that I learned as a child that I would never trade for anything else. And as a matter of fact, let me go ahead and make another statement while I'm at it. I think if it wasn't for all the values that my parents, my teachers, my friends taught in India when I was growing up, I would not have had the fighting chance to succeed in the United States. And I think that is imperative that I impart with that knowledge and that foundation to my children. And so
this sort of is a particular interest at this time of globalization, of the media, where you know, a lot of, you know, we tend to feel that a lot of the young Indians are being very American. So I was interested in the sort of, what would you consider being the sort of Americanness that we talk about, in the sense of, because our Indianness is sort of inherent and intrinsic to us. What is this Americanness then?
Well, that's a great question. Being American to me is about understanding what America's history is all about, and trying to, because I think, after all, if we are to succeed in a foreign land, We need to understand their historical and cultural perspectives. And it isn't just about the superficial stuff about going to movies or wearing the clothes they have or driving a BMW or what have you. But I think it is to delve deep into American psyche and understand it. And I have, in so many ways, although I was very, very challenged when I went there at such a impressionable age. I was there at 15 or 16, so it was a very challenging time for me personally. But I think that sort of forced me to assimilate faster, and that gave me the kind of lessons that I don't think I'll be able to explain in so many words. But I think, and if I'm not being too immodest, I think I have managed to not only maintain my Indianness, but also become substantially American. And that only comes with time and experience.
So what were some of those sort of shifts that you felt that you needed to make that sort of help you be more comfortable, more successful in America? What are some of the elements of this?
Well, I mean, language is probably the best example. Look, you are all fortunate enough to have been growing up in Delhi and in cosmopolitan places. I came from Coimbatore, which is a small little place it's a city, but it's a small little place in South India. So I think, for my personal opinion, I think that the kinds of things that I had to get over were the language barriers. So I thought if I could conquer that, then at least I had a fighting chance to get assimilated to the other aspects of society. And then you have like the silly things like making sure you understood what a prom in school was and what some of the lingo that's used, and then the cultural nuances, whether it's the way you dress or the way you behave. So those are the kinds of challenges I had to overcome, and I think I have done it. I hope I have done it.
It's a common cliche that sort of Indians who sort of don't always succeed in India are able, when they step out of India, to be successful. We hold out the success of Indians in foreign lands as evidence of the potential that Indians have to succeed. What do you think are the qualities that make this possible?
I think, let me just say this first. I think people in India should be and can be proud of the 1.2 million diaspora that live in the United States. And they have truly become a model community in the United States. I was an immigrant. I think when you leave your homeland for a foreign nation, the drive to succeed is immeasurable, and it is within you, and I don't think you can quantify it. And because you have taken this huge chance. My father was 50 years old when he left here. My mom was 40 years old when we all packed up our bags and sold everything we owned and left. Failure is not an option. And also there's something to be said for government and government regulations. Indians are probably the most capable, strongest human beings on this planet. They need the capacity to succeed. They have the will, but they need the capacity. Any policy that stifles progress, or any policy that does not allow the full potential of human beings to be exposed, I think is wrong-headed. And I think that's why I am so much in favor of the economic policies and the reforms that have been instituted since 1991. So when you take the same Indian who might have been marginally successful in India and put him in a foreign land, I think regulations and opportunity to succeed are the fundamentals necessary. And I'm not saying that Indians don't succeed. I'm just saying that you will see this entire nation blossom to its fullest potential. And I think that is what is so great about these reforms. You have seen the president, when he came here, ask for the reforms to be lifted, and I think the Indian people, and also you have to, where credit is due, it should be recognized, the leaders of the political system in India have their infinite wisdom realized that this is the right policy for the government and its people. and it is a singular determination of the people of India, and only Indians can determine this.
You've been at the sort of at the heart of the seat of American politics. There has been a shift in America's relationship with India. What do you think has catalyzed this? Is this sort of a new recognition? Is this realpolitik? Is it what's happening in other parts of the world?
Sure, I think it is. There's three reasons. One is you've seen the end of the Cold War. The paradigm of a bipolar world is no longer in place. Now it is a world which is dominated by democracies, and it will be dominated by democracies in the 21st century as well. And number two is frankly the economic reforms that were instituted in India in 1991. And number three is the Indian American community's increasing voice, vocal voice in Washington to reach out to India and build a stronger bridge between our two nations. Look, both India and the United States share a common value and a common heritage. We have the same language, business language, of course, English, that we share. We have everything in common, and what evaded us all through the Cold War is no longer there. That barrier is gone. And the president's visit, in my mind, at least is the starting point. It's been going on for a relationship between our two countries, at least from an economic standpoint, have been going on for a little while. But the relationship between two governments have begun, and I think you will see nothing but positiveness, and it is ours. And I think that the 21st century will usher in opportunities beyond our imagination. I think it is ours to take advantage of, or ours to lose.
You know, in this program we had Huntington of the Clash of Civilizations, and he had this notion of sort of, well, the clash of civilizations, and felt that India would have the option of either allying with the United States or with China in this sort of new world order where the new power blocks would emerge. Apart from this aspect of shared values and a shared commitment to democracy, which is really the kind of rhetoric, in a sense, that the American politician has used about India forever, really, and rarely translated into a concrete commitment or a concrete action. Do you see the shift and can you locate this in a larger picture that the United States sees emerging, and the role that India might play in this?
Absolutely, and I'll give you a great example that just happened 3 days ago or 4 days ago. Mr. Thomas Pickering, who was visiting India, returned back from Pakistan after his meeting with Musharraf, I assume, and I read this editorial in the Hindu, and to the extent that that it is gospel, I'll take it, and I'll tell you, and I have immense respect for the Hindu, so I like their editors and I like the newspapers, and the message that this editorial said is, for the first time, that there's this quantifiable shift in U.S. attitude towards India since the end of the Cold War. And I think it's measurable. And I think that is why I keep saying it isn't just rhetoric. It is about results. And you saw when the president came and left, there were about $1.4 billion in trade deals that were signed, at least memorandum and agreement were signed. Now you're seeing increased cooperation in the area of counterterrorism. You're seeing joint partnerships to deal with environment. You name an area, India and the United States, both on a government level and on a private sector level, are focusing. So these aren't just nice speeches that politicians in the United States get up and make. These are measurable results. And I think the onus is on both our people to make sure that we not only hold the feet of the government in both countries and hold them accountable to continue enhancing this relationship.
Should you perhaps exaggerate the sense of the people? India doesn't sort of figure on page 12, if it's lucky, of the New York Times. It still isn't sort of important to the American people and American policy as perceived by the people as perhaps China is. And I don't want to sort of shift this to a comparative mode, but how significant really was President Clinton's visit, given the fact that he was a president at the end of his term, We don't know that there will be a democratic White House. How enduring might sort of the glitz of behind the visit really be?
Well, this is my personal opinion. I think that there will be a Democrat in the White House, and then the person who will be elected will be Al Gore, who's the Vice President of the United States. The President's visit was very significant. It was the first state visit in 22 years. And if anybody who knows President Clinton knows that there is no such thing as a lame duck presidency in his presidency. He's probably one of the most active presidents in American history. So this is, again, not just rhetoric. This is about reaching out your arms in friendship and talking to the Indians face to face, not past each other, but to each other. Are there differences in policies? Absolutely. But I think in the long term, you'll see a convergence of differences, both in economic and security matters. Now, with regard to your question on the New York Times and India being on page 6, it's interesting you should bring up New York Times, because in the last 8 to 9 months, I have seen no less than 3 to 4 stories in the front fold on India, on Indian Americans. And what you're seeing is, and also this advance in global technology and global communication technology, you're seeing an increasing visibility on online newspapers, which have been carrying out this message about the need for enhanced Indo-US relations. So I think that's why I'm talking about the paradigm of the Cold War is no longer true.
Okay, Kris, you described yourself as being in politics. What political sort of goal, ambition, dreams do you have for yourself?
Well,
American politics.
I have one, and that is a 6-month goal. And that is to do everything in my power to elect Mr. Gephardt to be Speaker of the House, and that is my only ambition for the moment. And if I can do everything in my power to make him Speaker, then I think I've achieved my goal for the moment.
Well, I'm sure that's spoken as a true staffer. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.